Hey there, Keepos. Hi, yeah. Oh, I know. I'm upset at John Lithgow, too. I know. Hello, interwebs. I hope you are all doing well. I am here with my lovely cat, Keepo, who is currently purring away in my lap, and hopefully his presence will be a very calming one for the very angering and frustrating topic we have to discuss today, which is yet again about JK Rowling and Harry Potter. I know that I've talked about JK Rowling and Harry Potter way too much, more than I ever want to. However, the reason I want to discuss it today is because I think there's a particularly interesting dynamic going on with the recent Harry Potter series, and specifically around John Lithgow, in how Hollywood is attempting to launder in and muddy the waters around discussions of transphobia that I think is really important, because it's not just a dynamic that is going to be going on with Harry Potter, but it's going to be one that is going to be across the board in terms of how Hollywood and other institutions are going to be trying to erase, downplay, or completely ignore the attacks against trans people right now. And Harry Potter and this show and everything to do with it is just the most obvious and evident version of it. So I think it's well worth discussing here, talking about it in its specificity, and then kind of discuss what it means in the abstract in just a moment. To get to the specifics of it all, we're going to be discussing how Jonathan Lithgow is currently being used to launder in transphobia. Because recently an article came out on Deadline that had the headline, "John Lithgow responds to Harry Potter fans appalled with his Dumbledore casting." Now, if you just read that headline and you're like me and very steeped in what has been going on with JK Rowling and her anti-trans views and attacks on trans people in recent years, you might assume that that headline was directly talking about that controversy. There have been a lot of fans, myself included, I did a video on it a few months ago, who have been directly calling out not only Jonathan Lithgow, but other actors who have been cast in the Harry Potter series, such as Nick Frost, which was a deeply disappointing one for me in particular, who are actors who are big enough who do not need to struggle to find work. Someone like Jonathan Lithgow, Nick Frost, they are not names who need to work hard to be able to get a job in this climate with Hollywood right now, and yet they are still choosing to take a job in Harry Potter, which is a property that is directly funding JK Rowling. And I say directly funding because unlike many other franchises created by creators, JK Rowling gets direct financial benefits from Harry Potter directly under her contract with Warner Brothers, because she is in complete control of the IP and she just licenses it out to Warner Brothers. And so she gets to dictate and have final say on what is allowed and what is not allowed, and she directly benefits financially from anything Harry Potter related. And just to lay out this argument fully and flat out, she has been spending her last few years continually, endlessly attacking trans people. And not just rhetorically, like she's been doing on Twitter. If you look at her Twitter feed, like, it's nothing but just talking about trans people. It's kind of wild how much she is so hyper fixated on trans people on Twitter, but she is directly using her money to destroy trans people's rights. And we can see that most directly in the fact that JK Rowling very recently gave £70,000 to a group that was doing the Supreme Court appeal of the definition of woman in the UK, an appeal that just finalized a few days / week or so ago that clarified that the definition of woman under UK law is determined by biological sex, which is a decision that has been championed by anti-trans groups, TERF specifically, and JK Rowling herself in disgusting tweets like this. So if anyone wants to try and make the claim that has been one of the sort of overriding claims of the last few years when people have talked about J.K. Rowling's transphobia and people engaging with the Harry Potter IP, that, oh, well, just because we're engaging with Harry Potter doesn't mean that we're helping to fund anti-trans stuff because we can separate art from the artist. This is direct evidence that the money that she is making from Harry Potter is going directly to fund the erosion of trans people's rights. There are trans people right now directly being affected by the money and influence that J.K. Rowling has had quite literally under the law, not just rhetorically, not just in creating a generalized anti-trans mood in the UK, using her influence to try to, influence the mainstream thought on trans people. No, there's direct tangible laws that have been changed because of JK Rowling's anti-trans views that are harming a marginalized group. And it is inarguable at this point. It was inarguable before, quite frankly. She is someone with a huge platform who is directly using it to endlessly attack trans people. But if you were of the mind that, oh, well, we can separate art from the artist, I'm just giving my money to Harry Potter, here's direct evidence that that money is going directly to harming trans people. And by the way, it's worth saying that the attacks on trans people are not just going to affect trans people. Obviously, as we've already seen with the ruling in the UK, it affects many different people, cis women, women of color, trans men, non-binary people, the list can go on. And even beyond that, the TERF movement that JK Rowling is a part of has clearly targeted other groups beyond just trans people. They attacked trans women most overtly, but they also infantilize trans men, they attack trans men, they attack non-binary people, immigrants, as they have been doing for many, many months now. They attack people of color generally. It's all of these things are interrelated. I have done a video on my main channel about how all of these things are interrelated. Check that out. But if you want something more directly talking about JK Rowling and the TERF movement specifically, I highly recommend these two videos by my friend Vera Wild, who talked about JK Rowling's recent attacks against asexual people, as well as the recent ruling in the UK, and going into more depth on that. So please check out her videos if you want that, or check out my main one to discuss the larger TERF to fascism pipeline that this is used for. So with that argument out of the way, the reason that people are upset with Jonathan Lithgow and Nick Frost and many of the other actors who are big names getting cast in the Harry Potter show is the fact that they are giving their weight, their profile to a series that is going to build the not only fan base for a IP that is directly leading to the funding of anti-trans views, but using their status to get people more interested in the project. There are people who are certainly interested that Jonathan Lithgow, an actor that people have a lot of respect for, and Nick Frost, another actor who people have a lot of respect for and know, are going to be in the show, which has them going, oh, I'm interested now. I want to watch this because these cool actors that I know are in the project. And because of that, that is why people are upset. However, if you actually go in and read that Deadline article, the controversy that he is addressing supposedly is when he was in an interview on a BBC show called The One Show, which is one of those sort of daytime talk interview shows that many actors do, where he was asked about him being an American cast as a theoretically British wizard. And he basically answered like this.
I know there were plenty of people appalled that Americans should be hired to play the ultimate English wizard. I'm not an Englishman, although I've played one on TV. I remind everyone that I did play Winston Churchill on The Crown and did just fine.
You did, but more than fine, exactly.
So the controversy that the Deadline headline is referring to is not the one that most people would think. It is for the fact that he is an American cast as a British wizard and British character. And this is particularly galling because what it is doing, it is a very clear sign that Deadline, which is an institutional Hollywood magazine, is basically trying to muddy the waters on people coming to learn more about what the controversy around JK Rowling is and around Jonathan Lithgow and the casting of people in Harry Potter are. Because people will now go and look up online, if they ever hear about it, JK Rowling, Harry Potter, Jonathan Lithgow controversy, and articles like this one will be one of the first ones that they are going to get when they search it. And they'll look and see, oh, it's about him being an American playing a British wizard. That's rather silly. I guess I don't really need to pay attention to the controversy. I know, Kipo, it's upsetting. And for people like probably you and me, it may seem ridiculous that people don't already know this, but it is quite literally the case. If you go outside of our bubble, there are many people who still shockingly, despite many years of JK Rowling attacking trans people, don't know the direct, tangible effects that JK Rowling has been having on the trans community because of things like this, with no one directly addressing it. Now, there have been some people online saying that this is specifically Jonathan Lithgow's fault for articles like this. And I want to add a little bit of nuance to that, even though I am going to condemn Jonathan Lithgow overall. Because again, the article is pointing to an interview he did on The One Show, where he was just asked a general question about him being an American cast as a British wizard, not necessarily about the overall controversy in a vague sense. He was asked a direct question. So it wasn't necessarily him trying to overtly divert the question away from transphobia when he was asked directly. No, this is him being asked a direct question about the casting of him being an American, and then other outlets then creating the headline of addressing the controversy. And what this more signals, and I'm going to get to the criticism of Lithgow in just a second, so don't think I'm letting him off the hook, but what this more signals is a concentrated effort by Hollywood press, Hollywood media, to muddy the waters around this discussion around transphobia and JK Rowling, so that the Harry Potter series will be somewhat insulated from these discussions. And frankly, when it comes to this particular moment and topic, I have much more condemnation for the reporters, such as Glenn Garner, who was the one who wrote this article, who are framing articles this way, than I do have necessarily for Jonathan Lithgow. It's a very similar thing that we've been seeing in Hollywood, how Hollywood creates these narratives to try to justify things that they already want to do. A very similar recent evidence of this is around the movie Sinners, which, by the way, if you have not seen it, is a fantastic movie. Legitimately, I don't want to go off track here, but like Ryan Coogler's Sinners is one of the best movies I've seen of the year so far, and if I don't see a better movie this year than that one, I will be perfectly fine. It is wonderful and has some really, really deep and wonderful stuff about colonization. I don't want to spoil too much for you. Go see it. It's really good. However, around that movie, there has been a discussion based on the deal that Ryan Coogler made for the film, where he literally signed a deal that said he would retain rights of the movie after 25 years. So at 25 years after the movie has come out, so 25 years from now, in 2050, he will get rights back for the movie, which is a deal that many people in Hollywood are calling very scary and could destroy the movie industry, because it gives more ownership to the artists, which is something that artists have been slowly losing control of over the past few years and decades in Hollywood, with some of the biggest evidence being the recent strikes that we had, the writer strike and the actor strike. And certainly a lot of discussion was around who gets to own art, who gets to control art, who is the one making their money off of the art that many of the artists make, not just the institutions who are sort of wringing everything out of it and not paying the people actually working hard to make the art. And as a result, we are seeing headlines come out around the movie that are framing the movie as a potential failure, even though it made $60 million at the box office, which is a great opening weekend for an original movie. And yet much of the framing around the film has been, oh, it might have a harder path to profitability, despite the fact that movies like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a movie by Quentin Tarantino that had a similar opening with a similar path to profitability, were not framed as such. Certainly some people have also talked about the racial aspect of that, this being a black-led, black-created movie about black topics. Certainly, I'm sure that plays an element of this, especially considering that the reason that Ryan Coogler, and he's talked about this in interviews, wanted to have artistic control over this film was because the movie itself is about black communities and marginalized communities getting control of their art. So that is not incidental. But it is in large part just Hollywood creating these narratives to try to protect itself and its capital investments, so that this doesn't become a norm in Hollywood and artists demanding this type of deal. And so if the movie is framed a failure, then this type of deal is easier to downplay and try to not become the norm. And I say all of that to bring us back to what's happening with Jonathan Lithgow, because it is a very similar dynamic. It is not necessarily Hollywood is trying to attack trans people or hates trans people. What they are trying to do is protect their financial investment in the Harry Potter IP. And so these institutional, ingrained into Hollywood outlets like Deadline are helping to push that narrative in order to muddy the waters around these conversations. And it is quite frankly galling that no one is directly talking about these issues in these outlets. It's very overt what is happening here. And there's also something to be said about none of the reporters who have access to Lithgow, such as the people on The One Show, not directly asking him these questions, because they basically are being asked to give softball interviews. And certainly the people handling Jonathan Lithgow, his agents and such, are the ones that are setting him up to go into these softball interviews to create this air around him that is not going to let him ever address these issues head on. And it frankly takes a really brave reporter to ask him these questions at these moments. But I will call out the cowardice of reporters for not doing that. It's a very similar thing to what happened with Jacques Audiard's Emilia Perez movie just a few months ago, and I did a whole video on this on my main channel. If you looked at the conversation around Emilia Perez, especially before the controversy came out about Carla Sofia Gascon, the lead actress around the film, and her racism and her tweets that she did, few people in Hollywood were directly asking these questions about Emilia Perez and the controversy from the trans community around how that movie portrayed trans people. Most especially the director, Jacques Audiard, never got those questions. He never got asked them. He was always asked the softball questions about the movie. The people left to answer those questions were people like Carla Sofia Gascon. And Carla Sofia Gascon would give interviews where she was asked about this, and she downplayed the controversy around trans people. It was then allowing them to say, hey, look at this trans person saying it's okay for you to like this movie, despite all the fact that other trans people are criticizing it, because she is allowing you to feel good about not thinking about that, tossing aside other trans people's opinions because you have a token trans person saying it's okay. And that was even before Carla Sofia Gascon's racism came out, and as a result of that, that's why ultimately the narrative around the movie started to shift into the mainstream, and it ended up not winning as many Oscars as it was set up to do. Not because people recognized the transphobia inherent in the film, but because they saw the trans person that was playing defense for the film, then her getting controversy, and people feeling bad about trying to support a movie that enabled a vile racist like Gascon. But very few of the Hollywood folks that were voting for Emilia Perez, actually, if you looked at some of the reasons that they were voting and some of the interviews that were given, didn't care about the actual transphobia of the movie. They cared about Gascon's racism, which is something they should care about, but they didn't give a shit about the problems with the movie before that point. And it is very telling to me that they are willing to feel like they can't help a movie because a trans person is a piece of shit. But when the movie made by a cis dude who is not only racist towards Mexicans, but also transphobic towards trans people, does a movie, they don't give a shit. And a very similar thing is happening here. Jonathan Lithgow is getting off the hook for having to discuss these things, and he is able to get these softball questions about like, oh yes, of course, I'm an American who's playing a British person. How funny that people are upset by this. And he is not being asked directly these questions. Now, I want to be very clear. Lithgow, if he doesn't know it, frankly, he's deeply ignorant, and that makes me even angrier that he wouldn't do his due diligence to look into the projects that he is working on, that he is lending his weight towards, and the harm that he is lending his weight towards, especially because he is someone who has played a trans person in the past and won awards for playing a trans person in the past, so he's willing to benefit from us without directly trying to help our community overall. He's willing to get his accolades and then move on. And actually, by the way, same thing for Nick Frost, because actually one of Nick Frost's most recent projects was a series with a trans woman. He has people he is in community with who he could talk to. So he is well aware of this. So he's willing to get the goodwill of the trans community, work with the trans community, but not willing to actually listen to the trans community when we're saying you're lending your weight to harm to us. So that goes for Nick Frost and him, and frankly, all of the lead actors for the show. I have a bit more sympathy for the kid actors that are eventually going to get cast. They're kids. They don't necessarily know all of this information, so I have nothing but sympathy for them. I have more anger at their parents who will allow them to be cast in this show, but the kids, that whenever those kids get cast, no shade at them. I have more anger at these actors who do not necessarily need to take this job, who are taking it and lending their weight to it. But regardless, if Jonathan Lithgow is ignorant of that, I still condemn him. But more likely than not, he is fully aware, and at the very least, his agents are 100% aware. There is absolutely no way that his agents do not know what is going on with JK Rowling, and they don't care. They think that it is a good career move for him, and he will make money off of this, and he will gain accolades off of this, and so they are allowing it to happen. He is choosing to do this because he thinks he will get accolades, it'll be something that he will enjoy, but he doesn't necessarily care about how it's going to affect trans people directly and demonstrably by giving more money to a woman who is directly attacking trans rights. And these articles are muddying the waters and playing interference for that narrative to downplay the discussions around transphobia. And so the reason I wanted to make this video is that a lot of people are going to point at Jonathan Lithgow specifically as like, he's the problem, he's the one doing this. This is actually a much larger issue that is a much more systemic problem in Hollywood as an institution, as it is trying to protect itself and its money. Yes, I have condemnation for Jonathan Lithgow. I have condemnation for the reporters doing this, but it is an institutional problem. It is a systemic issue with how these issues are framed and how transphobia is continually ignored as an institutional and systemic problem. So that's basically what I wanted to kind of redirect us towards. Because yes, Jonathan Lithgow deserves all the condemnation for this, but it cannot just be Jonathan Lithgow. We need to understand the dynamics fully at play here that are leading to the attempts to erase the transphobia and direct harm to the trans community that shows like this Harry Potter series will create. And I want to end on this note, because I have even a few friends of mine who have podcasts and shows that do like news stuff on TV and movies and things, who are covering the Harry Potter show news. And I don't think that they should stop covering the Harry Potter show. I don't necessarily think that they should watch the show or give any financial support to the show. However, I am not against people covering the news around the show, especially if that is their day-to-day job. However, at every single time that Harry Potter comes up as a conversation, this needs to be something you include directly in discussions around this show. You need to taint this show with the true information on how JK Rowling is attacking the trans community. We cannot ignore it altogether and completely, especially if it is, again, your job to cover it. I would ask like people who don't necessarily need to cover Harry Potter as part of like the news cycle or as part of the job. They just sort of want to do it as something for fun or, you know, just something that they can cover or whatever for their content on the channel. I would say don't do that. However, if you need to cover it for news, I think you should, and always, always, always link it to this discussion on trans people, as well it should. Taint it with it. Taint the discussion with it, because we need to make sure that people are aware of this and make sure they know what they are funding, what they are doing to trans people when they support something like this. So please, please continue covering Harry Potter, but make sure that you fully and completely discuss the transphobia of JK Rowling and how it demonstrably helps her to harm trans people if you support something like Harry Potter. All right, that is everything that I have to say. Hope you're all taking care of yourselves, and as always, my friends, live long and prosper. God, why was taint the word that I used over and over again there? That was a word choice.